on the Sports Bash. Earlier today, you heard me talk about it here on 97.3 ESPN, how the U.S. Women's Olympic team went to overtime, come from behind, actually. They were down 1-0. They tied the game. They go to overtime, and then they get the goal that won them the gold. So can the men follow up on the women's gold medal efforts? Well, we'll ask Kevin Durso, who's been closely following the Winter Olympics hockey action. Check out all of his coverage over at 97.3 ESPN.com. Kevin, welcome in. How you doing today?
Doing well, Josh. How are you?
Well, I'm doing better than the Canadian goaltender. I was saying earlier, Kevin, that I do feel a little bad for her because the way that goal trickled in, she's gonna have nightmares about the rest of her life. Like, she's gonna be like waking up in like a cold sweat at like 3 a.m, thinking about how she let that goal in. Like, I mean, it's one thing like getting like a sniper shot past you or like some like nice little like whip around or something, but to let that trickle in, like, she's got to be gut wrenched.
Well, it's two people then, because it's the goaltender, but it's also the defenseman who gets beat on the move. You saw the reaction immediately. Her head goes down. The defenseman on that was Claire Thompson for Canada, as Megan Keller just makes a brilliant move to the middle of the ice and gets that backhand off before anybody can do anything about it. And that's the golden goal. We've seen it. We've seen this happen in other circumstances where it goes against the United States. In this case, they cap it off and get the gold.
When you think about, because obviously women's hockey is viewed a little differently than men's hockey, right? Mm-hmm. And so, for the women, there's a lot of people who are excited. They're like, go USA. But like, if the women, if it was not USA versus Canada, right? Is anybody watching that game? Like, I'm not trying to be mean, but like, I feel like we care more about like soccer, for example. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like U.S. women's soccer is cared more about than, let's say, like Japan women's soccer. Like, I feel like, for women's sports, North America is still like the hotbed versus other countries.
Sure, and to me, that's why the two signature matchups of the women's tournament were both times that the U.S. and Canada played each other. That was in preliminaries. That was kind of what sets the bar for what was to come today, and then you're just waiting for exactly what today was. The only thing to me that was interesting about that was that Canada kind of got a scare from Switzerland in the semifinals leading into this game, so you kind of felt like, who knows what can happen? Maybe there's somebody out there, a different team out there that can emerge in this, but it's been typically, that this is now 8 different times that they've had women's hockey in the Winter Olympics over the years since 1998, and it's been U.S. Canada in 7 of them. So tells you what all you need to know. But, for me, watching this whole thing at this point, I don't know that we've ever seen a better U.S. women's hockey team than this one. This is probably as good as it gets to this point. I put it out there before the third period. You come into the game, you've outscored your opponents 31-1 in the whole tournament through 6 games. And in the 7th game of the tournament that you're in now, you're down 1-0 on a shorthanded goal. You might actually go through this whole thing outscoring your opponents 31-2 and still somehow get silver. So instead, you cap this off with the gold medal. You end up outscoring opponents 33-2, and it's true immortality for a team like this, that you pulled this off the way that you did. You didn't lose a game, obviously, and you only gave up 2 goals in the process. We may never see anything better than that.
Well, speaking of seeing, is the fact that a lot of people watch today's game, but apparently, Kevin, a lot of people watched yesterday's game too. I see the announcement here that yesterday's U.S. men's hockey game, when they went to overtime, it was the most watched game since 2010 for a game, yesterday and today's game. So we got 2 straight days of record viewership for the hockey. Before we get into the particulars, what does that say to you, Kevin, that we're getting this level of interest from people watching?
Well, there's still an element to me, and especially in the Winter Olympics, as compared to some of the other, like the summer games, I would say basketball has a chance to dominate because you get name recognition from the basketball programs. And when USA sends a basketball team to the Summer Olympics, you're going to get superstars who play. And then there's the international aspect of that. The same thing happens with the men's hockey tournament in this case, and the women's tournament with US Canada in particular. Now that there is a professional women's hockey league out there too. There's familiarity with these athletes. You start to see them all over the place, and you see them in different capacities. You see them, Hillary Knight's not just the captain of the U.S. women's team. She's done TV work for NHL games in the past. So there's some recognition there. And then obviously with the NHL sending players back this year, that's why you have to go back to 2010, honestly, because in 2014, it wasn't the U.S. that dominated that by any stretch. So Canada didn't play the U.S. in the gold medal game. So I'm sure viewership was down because of that. So you got to go back to that U.S.-Canada matchup. It's why Four Nations last year was so successful, that you got that result, you got that game, and set the stage for hopefully what's to come in a couple of days, because that's where it's trending towards. You saw this lineup for the women's side with, well, the top two teams are the U.S. and Canada, so it seems like we're going to get that in the gold medal game, and we did. And now you look at the other side with the men's tournament, and it's U.S., Canada are 1 and 2 again. Canada's the 1 seed, U.S. is the 2 seed on the men's side. So if everything goes according to the way that everybody kind of expects it to, you're going to get that U.S.-Canada matchup again for the gold medal on the men's side, just like you did on the women's side. And it's sure to spark a lot of viewership, because we know the phenomenon that hockey is in Canada. It's practically religion there. People go crazy for it. And I think when you get this element of it, when you get the representation of your country behind it and everybody's on the same team, as opposed to, who cares that it's the Kachuk brothers play for 2 different teams and all the Hughes brothers play for different teams and Austin Matthews plays for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Who cares about that? When they put on a Team USA jersey, everybody's rooting for them the same way, that it doesn't matter who they play for Team Canada, from Team Canada. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Nathan McKinnon on Colorado, Sidney Crosby on Pittsburgh, or Connor McDavid for Edmonton. They all represent the same team as well.
Totally Kevin Durso, our Flyers insider from 97.3 ESPN.com. Check out all of his coverage of the Winter Olympic hockey games over at 97.3 ESPN.com. So let's get to the men here. Obviously, they get the big win yesterday, and now they're going to play tomorrow in the semifinal. If they win tomorrow, they'll be playing on Sunday morning Eastern time, for those who are wondering what the schedule is. But what's more important is, are you, Kevin, surprised at all that they are in the semifinal, and what are their chances of making it to the final?
Yeah, I'm not surprised they're in the semifinal. That was probably to be expected. I feel like a lot of people going back to Four Nations, or even just going back as far as the last time the NHL was participating in the Olympics, you tend to put the U.S. and Canada together. So the U.S. being potentially, in play for a medal of any kind is not surprising. It shouldn't be. To me, the one thing that, the answer to your other question is really to be determined, because everybody over the course of the quarterfinal, with the exception of the team that the U.S. happens to be playing, Slovakia, they were the one team that went through the quarterfinal without really much of a scare. They won their game 6-2, and everybody else had to go to overtime to get there. So everybody had a little bit of a scare with whatever it may be. Canada is losing 3-2 with under 8 minutes to play after dominating the preliminary round, and they find a way to win in overtime. The U.S. is leading 1-0 for pretty much half the game and give up the tying goal with under a minute and a half to go, and they find a way to win in overtime. So it's really up for grabs here. And to be honest with you, Canada came in dominating the preliminary round, and everybody else was almost on an even playing field. There was not another team that's in this thing that felt like they could really reach Canada's level based on preliminaries. And now you see what happened in their game against the Czechs, that they really had to fight off a possible upset there. Now I think everybody's fair game. I think you're going to get 2 really great semifinal matchups here where, U.S. Slovakia. Slovakia's kind of been the upstart team of this whole thing. I don't think anybody really had them in this portion of the tournament. And then Canada, Finland is a really strong matchup for considering at this point that's a 1-4 matchup in terms of seeding. That's a really strong 1-4. I think a lot of people would have not been surprised if you would have said Finland was the number 3 right behind Canada and the U.S. And instead, that's a 1-4. Canada's going to have to go against a team that's probably actually has the edge in goaltending compared to a lot of the other positions. Canada's loaded it forward, obviously. And there is still, for Canada, there's still that lingering question about whether or not Sidney Crosby plays tomorrow. That's still up in the air. And that's where the U.S. can potentially take advantage. They have all of their pieces in place. they've kind of gotten by without, really putting, the scores kind of say that it looks like they dominated. I don't think they truly have yet. And so I'm curious to see if, and they may never at this point, they may just have to gut it out a lot. You're down to the final 4 teams in this thing. You might just have to gut your way to a gold medal if you want to be like the U.S. women's team that gets a gold medal and gets to come home with that. So can I see them making the gold medal game? Absolutely. I think that's what's expected, but I'm not going to be surprised if it goes the other way, because now you're down to those 4 teams that are left that anything really could happen.
You mentioned about goaltending. Let's back up that for a second, because one of the reasons why the game was so close yesterday was because Markstrom made some amazing saves at times in that game, and by the end it was almost like, man, if he got a little more help, right? Maybe the U.S. doesn't win that game. But is the goaltending for the U.S. good enough? Is Hellebuyck, is he going to be good enough at this level? Because that's been the question in the NHL, right? Is like, hey, he can win Vezina trophies, but can he win a championship? So now we can kind of like roll that, narrative into the Olympics, right?
Certainly. And it becomes even more of a loaded question when you consider what happened in preliminaries. I was very critical of this decision when they had to split them up. Every team really in the preliminaries had a back-to-back somewhere in there. And when the U.S. was faced with their back-to-back in preliminaries, they started Jeremy Swayman in one of the games, but dressed Hellebuyck as the backup when you're carrying 3 goalies to begin with. Swayman didn't have it that day. And as you're going through, whether it's after the first period, after the second period, you had no choice but to ride it out, because you wanted Hellebuyck for the next day, because if you didn't win that game, you certainly needed that game. And if you wanted any shot at the top seed, you needed Hellebuyck to play in the final game of preliminaries. And you got Jake Ottinger just sitting there minding his business. He's not going to dress for any of these games. He's just there to get it's like getting a participation trophy practically at that point. Like, you're just here, but that was the opportunity to have him on the bench just in case, because you never know, right? You just never know when a goalie's going to have it or not. USA came in really with one of the better goaltending trios of this thing. That's where Canada was getting a lot of questions, was their goaltending. Is Binnington going to be the stud that he's been in the playoffs sometimes, or is he going to be the other way around, because he runs very hot and cold? And there were questions about whether or not it even should have been Binnington to start. They have Logan Thompson, who's been backing up, and there was a thought maybe it should be him who got the starting nod. It didn't really ever come to that. Binnington's been the guy for them, and he's going to continue to be the guy. Hellebuck's going to have to be that guy for Team USA, whether he likes it or not, and I'm sure he does as a Vezina winner and a Hart Trophy winner at that. You want the spotlight. You're going to have to want the spotlight in this situation, because it's very likely going to come down to goaltending. You saw it today on the women's side that was a goaltending duel, more or less. Anything happens otherwise, the result's different. So the way that played out, it turned out to be more of a goaltending duel than a high scoring game. The women on the U.S. side had averaged over 5 goals a game coming in, and it only took 2 to win a game. And that's all they were going to really be able to get because of how well goaltending was on both sides. So you need that to replicate on the men's side, that Hellebuyck needs to be the guy and first against Slovakia first and foremost, and then you're going to come back with it 2 days later and need the same thing in the gold medal game, presumably against Canada. And we saw it last year when it came down to it, when Canada needed a great performance in that final in 4 Nations to win, and Binnington gave it to him. So it's in there, he's capable, so you need your guy to be just as good.
Yeah, and that I saw an article today about how Binnington, he only plays well in big moments. Like, it was the joke in the article I read this morning. I forget. I think it was on The Athletic, but it was like, I think the title was like, why is Jordan Binnington only good when the pressure is on, kind of thing. And it's like, but it's kind of true. It's like the guy wins the Stanley Cup, he helps you win 4 Nations, but if it's like a Tuesday in December, he'll let through 5 goals. It's the strangest thing in the world.
Yeah.
By the way, when you were mentioning about the U.S. backup goaltender just sitting there, right? Mm-hmm. It reminded me. Did you watch the Netflix documentary about the 1980 hockey team?
Yeah, I did.
And remember the backup goaltender? They're interviewing him from that team, and he's like, I knew I wasn't coming in for Jim. He's like, I was just there just in case. He's like, nobody wants me to go in to play this game.
Right.
So when you were saying that about Ottinger, I was thinking about the guy in the documentary being like, nobody knows who I am.
But what's interesting about that is that in 1980, that's probably a totally different scenario. You have your guy, and the NHL was like that too. You have your guy, you just stick with it no matter how long. The way that the NHL treats goaltenders, you got NHL coaches behind the bench here that do change goaltenders pretty frequently. Some guys have really quick hooks when a guy doesn't have it, and guys usually don't. The back-to-back thing, they don't like starting the same guy in a back-to-back, and they. In this particular situation where most NHL rosters aren't carrying 3 goalies, you had a built-in reason to give Hellebuck an entire day off and not even have to worry about that possibility. And I really think that was, I had said it's really malpractice on the part of Mike Sullivan and coaching staff there to not have that situation prepared, to be prepared for the possibility that your second guy may not be good enough in that particular day. You have a third guy. Take the number 1 out for one day if you don't plan to play him, and your whole game plan is to have him play the next day.
Well, you kind of led me to my final question I had for you, Kevin, which is, we've been talking about how these are NHL players, NHL coaches. Who is the NHL player or coach who you believe has had the biggest impact on these Olympics in terms of if that country didn't have this player or this coach, how different things could it be?
That's an interesting one, because on one hand, I could give you an answer about Canada's side, because if you don't have, first of all, the game changed a lot when Sidney Crosby wasn't playing. So there's one influence right there. They're a team that has Connor McDavid pretty much as the backup captain, if you will. If Crosby's not able, it's an interesting element to international hockey, by the way. If Crosby's not able to play, they have to put the C on somebody else. And it must be nice to look down your bench and go, hey, I don't know if I have the best captain of the last 20 years. So I have the second best and the third best, probably. Or actually, McKinnon's not even a captain in Colorado, but he could be. You could make the argument that he could be just about anywhere else. So you have that. I think there's an element to, a lot of people said that there was a lot of reporting out there after that game was over that when Crosby wasn't able to finish the game, John Cooper was in the room before the third period as the head coach saying, don't let this be Sidney Crosby's last Olympic game. And it's really funny to me because I felt the parallels of that watching the women's game today, because you need 1 goal to tie the game. You possibly are going to lose gold on the women's side. And who gets it? Your captain does, who's playing in her 5th and final Olympic games. Of course it's her, because, and similarly, if Crosby were to play in a situation like this, if Crosby scored a golden goal again, and it's possibly his last Olympic games, would anybody be shocked? He's been one of the most clutch players over the last 2 decades. So it lines up that way. So, but I wonder if John Cooper kind of has an edge in that too, that he influences his team. He's just the coach who pushes all the right buttons and makes all the right decisions. It's an interesting question, because I'm trying to figure out the parallel for the U.S. side, and goaltending's a big part of it. But I really wonder if at this point, the lifeblood of that team for the most part are the Tkachuk brothers. They really are the two that drive everything. But there's a lot of discounting going on for Austin Matthews, that he might not be as good as people think he is, or why is he the captain or whatever. There's interesting dynamics that go into a room when you pick a captain, or when you have a guy who's your captain. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the guy who puts up the most points, or who is the best player even on the team, or who is, in this case, certainly not the guy who's won the most Stanley Cups in that room, because if that was the case, you'd be turning to the guy who's won back-to-back cups in Matthew Tkachuk. That's an easy decision. But Austin Matthews is that guy, because I think that there's people who just look to him for all the reasons. First overall pick, a top goal scorer in the league, typically a guy that they seem to rally around. And he's done his part pretty well for the most part, all things considered. I know there's people out there who may not believe that, but he's been one of the better players on that team. And I wonder if that's where this goes. You have a lot of situations where, same thing with Quinn Hughes. Quinn Hughes is a follow the leader kind of guy for USA right now. And he wasn't part of, there's a lot of people who are pointing out, he wasn't part of the 4 Nations roster last year. So imagine what would have happened if that was your number 1 guy that you can throw out there in an overtime. They played in overtime last year in 4 Nations, and US did not win in that case. Could it be different? Because you have certain pieces that maybe make a difference. So there's a lot of X factors in there that go into it. I can only hope that after tomorrow's action is over, we're talking about the same matchup, that it's another US-Canada gold medal game on tap, and that you know everybody would hope for a different result, obviously, because there were a lot of eyes. We talked almost a year ago to the day, Josh, about how many eyes were on four nations, and I was telling you then, this is what it's setting up. Everybody now wants to see USA, Canada for the gold on the men's side, because you set it up this way. The stage was set for not just those two nations, but that the NHL players were going to be involved, and you might be able to get that situation again. You just hope that it comes out the other way, because there certainly was that feeling with the women's side that felt like this was their time. Not to pull a quote from the movie Miracle, it really felt like it was their time though, and you hope that the same thing happens for the U.S. men, that it might be their time, because it's certainly, you know, over the years it's advanced that they are one of the top teams that are able to show up, especially when you can bring the NHL players. Canada's loaded, but everything is on the table, and you just hope for the different result.
He's Kevin Durso, our Flyers insider from 973ESPN.com. Check out all of his Olympic hockey coverage right now on the website. Give him a follow on the X platform at Kevin_Durso. And they joined us right here on the Sports Bash on 973 ESPN. Great stuff today, Kevin.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon.